chapter 1. And here we have the two objectives of this chapter. First, we are going to define economics, and we will try to explain the questions that economists try to answer. Second, we will introduce ourselves to the economic way of thinking, the special logic that economists employ. Okay? Now, the subject of economics was born because philosophers began to grapple with questions of resource scarcity. See, before these sciences were born, including the natural sciences, the only subject that we really had was philosophy. So philosophy is like the mother of all the sciences, the natural sciences and the social sciences. And philosophers at some point began to think about how humans make decisions when resources are scarce. And that gave birth to the subject of economics. So what is scarcity? It says that scarcity is the condition that arises because human wants exceed the ability of resources to satisfy them. You follow me? And faced with scarcity, humans must make choices. And economics is really about this choice making that we humans must engage in, faced with scarcity. Now, when one speaks of resources, we have these four kinds of resources. Economists like to classify resources into these four types: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And let me talk about these resources in some detail. Now, land is all natural resources. So land includes all natural resources. So this would include the oil under the ground. It would include all the fish in the oceans. It would include all the wood that resides in trees in a forest. You follow me? So all natural resources are land. Labor, on the other hand, consists of human effort. Human effort in the production of goods and services. So that is labor, right? Capital. Now, capital has a very special meaning here in this course. It isn't money. Capital is not financial capital. So let me make that clear. Capital isn't money. It isn't financial capital. Rather, capital means physical capital. Capital is physical capital. And what is physical capital? Physical capital consists of tools and machines. Tools and machines. And the fourth scarce resource that we humans must deal with is entrepreneurship. And what is entrepreneurship? Entrepreneurship is business acumen, I guess you would call it. Business smarts. You see, you need an entrepreneur to bring land, labor, and capital together in a useful, profitable way. Correct? So these are our four scarce resources. And because humans are faced with scarcity, we must make choices. Let me give you an example of a choice that you make faced with scarcity. You only have 24 hours in a day, of which you can spend between 8 and 12 perhaps doing all your necessary things like eating and sleeping, right? And that leaves you with a limited amount of time with which to study, work, or play, correct? Now that time that you have every day is a scarce resource. right? And because of that scarcity, you have to continually make choices. Is that correct? Should I study now or should I watch that TV show instead? That's a decision you're making, a choice. Is that correct? Now, why am I saying this? Why am I bringing this up? Because I'm trying to illustrate to you that the reason we have to make choices is because of scarcity. Now, if there was no scarcity, if resources were all super abundant, then we wouldn't really have to choose between this and that. Is that correct? And what economists study is this human decision making. How we make these choices is the subject matter of economics. So once again, economics is the social science that studies how individuals, businesses, governments, and entire societies make choices under conditions of scarcity. So that's the formal definition of economics. Right? Now, does anyone know what a social science is? How is this different from, let's say, physics or biology? What's a social science? Well, the key here is social, so we're dealing with human societies. Is that correct? We're dealing with human societies, right? That's the definition of a social science. And there are many other social sciences out there. Can you name me a couple of other social sciences? Sociology, absolutely. Sociology, go on. Psychology is a social science. Anthropology, political science. You have a whole host of social sciences out there, correct? Economics, too, is a social science. And if it can be distinguished from the other social sciences is that it is preoccupied with not all human decision-making, but human decision-making under conditions of scarcity. Right? Also, it is perhaps the most mathematical of all the social sciences. Modern economics has become very highly mathematical. We use a lot of math, a lot of statistics, and that distinguishes it again from some of the other social sciences. Okay? Now, economics is divided into two parts. You have microeconomics and you have macroeconomics. Now, the word micro means small, and the word macro means large. Right? So what is microeconomics about? Microeconomics is concerned with the small picture. So an analogy would be that a microeconomist places the economy under a microscope. You follow me? And observes the goings-on among the individuals. Businesses, individual consumers, etc., who make up the economy. So the microeconomist is concerned with the behavior of the individual agents who make up the economy. Right? So the microeconomist, as I said, places the economy under a microscope, in a sense. The macroeconomist, on the other hand, is concerned with the big picture. Right? So the macroeconomist takes an overview of things. The macroeconomist is concerned with such things as the national growth rate of the economy, the national rate of unemployment, the national rate of inflation, etc. Right? So the macroeconomist is concerned with the big picture. Yes? Now, because of scarcity, because of the fact that four resources, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, are all limited in quantity. They're all scarce. Because of that, all societies have to deal with these three questions. Now, these questions arise because of scarcity. They wouldn't arise if resources were superabundant. Follow me? First question is, what to produce? What should the US devote its resources to producing? That's the first question. Now, why do we need to ask this question? If resources were superabundant, we wouldn't have to ask this question, am I correct? Because we could make everything. But now, because we have limited resources, we have to decide what to make. We have to make choices. Should the US spend more on defense, or should it spend more on kindergarten to grade 12 schooling? Should it spend more on human services? Do you follow me? What should our society spend its resources on, devote its resources to produce? That's our first question. What to produce? What goods and services should be produced, and in what quantities? The second question that we're faced with is how to produce. The second question is about methods of production. Because once we've decided we're going to make such and such goods, our next question is, how do we set about making them? Because we have choices there as well. Goods can be made, goods and services can be made in a variety of ways. I'd like you to think of construction. Let's look at the example of construction. Now in the US, if you go to a construction site, you observe a relatively small number of workers, right? If you see a home being built, you usually see about 3 or 4 people, maybe fewer, hanging around. But these guys, you notice, are very well equipped with capital, with tools and machines, right? These few workers have holsters, have a whole bunch of tools with them, nail guns and whatnot. Am I correct? So you have a small number of workers with a lot of machinery, right? And production in the US, not just construction, tends to be like that. It tends to be what's called capital intensive. So in the US, you have capital intensive methods of production, meaning production that uses a lot of capital and relatively less labor. Yes? Now you can go to many poorer countries, Mexico even perhaps, or countries further south, and you would find that construction sites look a whole lot different. How is that? There you would observe many more workers, and each worker would be less well equipped than his American counterpart. You follow me? So in poorer countries, and you can go to even poorer countries in Latin America, you go to countries in Asia, you could go to India, for instance, where I come from, and their construction sites would be swarming with workers, but these workers would have practically nothing to work with. They'd have very rudimentary tools. You follow me? So the methods of production employed in many other countries would be labor intensive. So in the US, you have capital intensive methods, but in many other countries you have labor intensive methods. Let me give you another example. The famous Cuban cigar. You've heard of that? Right? Cuban cigars are these prized cigars, right, which are, as of now, if I'm not mistaken, still unavailable in the US. Why? Do you want to know? Why are Cuban cigars unavailable in the US? At least legally. Come on. Against which country? Exactly. The US has not had relations with Cuba in a long time. Is that correct? Although lately that's changed. You may be aware of that. Lately, the US is bent on normalizing relations with Cuba, but as of now, we don't get Cuban goods in the States. Is that correct? Now, how is the Cuban cigar made? Now, these are hand-rolled even today, right? So you have these very rudimentary factories where usually a whole bunch of women sit hand-rolling these cigars, right? Now, to keep them entertained, you have in the middle of this factory floor a high chair, kind of like the chair in which a lifeguard sits at the edge of a swimming pool. And on top of this high chair sits a person who, all day long, reads out romantic novels to these women. You follow me? So that's the way they do things in Cuba. Now, would you call that capital intensive or labor intensive? Very labor intensive. You follow me? Now, instead of that guy up there reading these romantic novels, you could just put a CD of these recordings and just play that. Am I correct? But no, you have a live person up there reading these things, keeping these women entertained all day long as they roll these prized Cuban cigars, which sell for $20, $50, $100 each. Okay? We have just a couple of minutes. Just don't get rested. Just a second. The last question that we have here is, for whom to produce? In other words, once we've decided what we're going to make and how we are going to make these things, our last question is, once these goods have been made, who gets to consume them? Correct? So the third question is about distribution. The third question is about the distribution of goods to consumers. Who gets to consume these goods is the third question that all societies have to face. And remember, all these questions arise fundamentally because of scarce resources. We will stop here today.